Charleston County Council member Rob Wehrman has tackled a lot of issues in his first 6 months on Charleston County Council. I speak exclusively with him for his first interview since he was sworn in for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Rob Wehrman, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Good to be here, Quintin. Thanks for having me again. Great to see you.
Oh, likewise. Obviously, now you're a Charleston County Council member, and I know that you're obviously one of the council members for Charleston County Council, and you actually represent District 3. Can you tell me what part of the county that represents?
Sure. So, it's mostly in North Charleston, although there's a lot of Mount Pleasant and a little bit of downtown. The Mount Pleasant part stretches really from more or less Patriots Point and kind of winds its way all the way to Brickyard. Okay. Downtown, maybe Ansonboro would be the best description, and then it sort of snakes its way back up to sort of Park Circle, up Rivers Avenue corridor to, sort of Trident Medical Center, that area. So it's a long stretch of Charleston County. A lot of different types of communities there, and it's certainly one that's seen a lot of the challenges, but there's the same challenges, I think, that are facing a lot of other communities in Charleston County. And so I think on County Council, certainly I have some particular interest in what's going on in my district, but we have to make decisions that are affecting the whole of Charleston County. So,
and what are those challenges that you're looking at right now?
Well, I mean, I think not with great surprise, affordable housing has been a challenge that I've spent a lot of time on recently. We have certainly made some strides, I think, towards trying to advance issues of what I would call sort of alternative transportation in various means, be that walking and bike paths, and prioritizing those types of projects, or be that the Low Country Rapid Transit project. The way we advance those is maybe different in different arenas. I think sometimes it's good for the county to not get in the way of certain things, and then I think sometimes it's good for the county to kind of put the foot on the gas pedal on other issues. So those are, I guess, a couple of the themes that have come up, but certainly, I mean, Charleston County Council, we see a lot of different things come forward. So those are, again, some of the issues that I've certainly been interested in, and I think we've spent a pretty good amount of time on them in the first 6 months here.
Let me get to that in just a moment, but you obviously talked about the things that the county should stay out of and the things that the county should put the gas on. What exactly are those?
Well, I think I think we've made some decisions that. So the thing that I think maybe there was some potential that the county would be more involved with was some of the transit projects, but of course CARTA and the COG, right. I think they're somewhat better positioned to sort of take the lead administratively on some of those issues that certainly I want the county to put the gas on a little bit more. Again, perhaps unsurprisingly, affordable housing is one where I do think obviously I've been pretty vocal about the fact that I think we need more involvement there. So those would just be two examples. I think that those are probably the first two that come to mind, and that's certainly what I was thinking when I answered your question.
Sure. And obviously in the 6 months, what aspects or accomplishments of your first 6 months that you're actually proud of right now?
As I said, I think Low Country Rapid Transit is moving forward fairly well. I'm excited to see where that goes. I think that on the affordable housing issue that I've mentioned several times here, I think we've had some disagreements on council, but I think we've certainly begun a dialogue that I think is becoming increasingly more and more productive. So I'm certainly proud of that, but not in any way looking to rest on our laurels here.
Speaking of which, how are you reviewing and assessing a variety of housing policies, both short-term and long-term implementations.
Well, so how am I personally doing it, or how is the county doing it? I mean, I will tell you, I'm personally doing it, by certainly doing some of my own research, speaking with folks on county staff, speaking with folks who are sort of in that space in the community. There's a lot of different ways to try and tackle that issue. And how's the county doing it? Well, the county is doing a lot of the same things. I mean, I think that our county staff members and our county council members are also talking with various community members and folks who work in those industries. Certainly, we will be, are expected to be hiring, a consultant to sort of develop something of a master plan in that regard. So that will be an added piece that should come fairly shortly. And, I think that's sort of the process that we're looking at doing right now.
How much would this consultant cost the average taxpayer?
I couldn't tell you the number right now. I mean, we don't have a contract. So, that contract would come back to county council, and so we'll find that out shortly.
And has the contract been sent out?
So the request to solicit folks to fill that position has been sent out, but again, we haven't decided on who it would be, and I haven't even seen. I don't even think the time has finished for that to come back for this sort of next stage of that decision. So I couldn't tell you that right now.
What was the county's master plan before this decision to hire a consultant?
Well, I mean, I think there were a few things going on. Certainly, when you say the word plan, and I know that you're referring more generally, but our planning department has in fact been working on some revisions to sort of zoning codes and other regulatory issues that are going to have to be part of any sort of broader approach. And I think those are something that we've seen a little preview of and will be coming up, in the next couple months here for review in front of council. So I think that plan has been in the works for some time. We're all well aware of the referendum. I think that what is coming into focus is maybe sort of an extension of what efforts could be done apart from the planning, department to sort of either directly or indirectly subsidize production of housing, sort of in a more hands-on basis. So, I think those are, generally speaking, sort of the two big pillars of any general approach. I think the county has certainly been looking at both for some time. One is probably a little further along than the other, but I think certainly having someone come in or having county council come in and sort of try and synthesize what might have, I don't know that it was necessarily ever two tracks, but what might be two different policy approaches into how do those things sort of mesh together and interact. I don't think that there's any issue with that, and if there's other ideas or things we might be missing, I think that's certainly also a positive to learn and evaluate.
Which one of those tracks would be ideal right now?
Well, I don't think there's any one that's ideal. I think we kind of need both. I mean, the scale of the need is so significant that I don't think we should be writing off one or the other. I've said a few times that when it comes to planning and zoning, of course the county doesn't have zoning authority over where we're sitting right now, much of sort of the Rivers Avenue corridor, large swaths west of the Ashley, pretty much anything that is the town of Mount Pleasant is definitively not county zoning jurisdiction. So, I do think that, now certainly, James Island, west of the Ashley, there are plenty of areas that are pretty suburban at the very least, that the county has some zoning authority over. So I don't want to dismiss our ability to really make a significant difference when it comes to those types of reforms. However, I would say that, what we don't, I don't think anyone wants to do this, I certainly don't want to do this, is we don't want to say, if zoning is our only tool, that sort of necessarily means that, from the county's perspective at least, any affordable housing that gets built either through the market or whether it's called affordable housing technically would sort of necessarily be in those zones. So you wouldn't be having any real effect, downtown Rivers Avenue corridor. And I think, there's some serious drawbacks to that, in that, one of the potentials that affordable housing is sort of an issue is that it has the potential to interact with issues of traffic, issues of flooding, even by saying, if we're going to get folks from having to move further and further out, take up more and more space, we can kind of bring folks who might otherwise have been pushed out of the sort of urban core back in. You have the ability to kind of go after a couple birds with one stone there. If the only housing that gets built is outside of that urban core, then you really start to come into some pretty serious drawbacks there. But again, these are really pretty nuanced conversations. There's certainly areas that are within the county's planning jurisdiction that could do for some reform, and I think we're well on our way to do that.
Well, let me ask you a basic question. What are those zoning revisions that are ideal right now?
I think the basic answer would be there's got to be some form of, frankly, upzoning. I mean, when you look at highly restrictive zoning codes, what they're doing is they're basically saying it's illegal to build anything that doesn't fit within this. So you're restricting the ability of developers, builders, to find what might work. And what might work within the confines of that particular zoning code may only work if the price is twice as much as a working family can afford. If you remove some of those restrictions, it does give folks the ability to try at least to, they say, pencil out projects that could be marketed at more affordable levels. So, I think one of the tools that you've seen, certainly the City of Charleston, and I think we're looking at doing something similar, is not just saying, okay, now you can build 4 stories, or now you can build, such and such amount of units, but saying you can build such and such amount of units, assuming, this number remains affordable. I think that is, potentially a good tool, but you've got to be very careful with sort of the numbers there and make sure that it's not too restrictive, or maybe no one takes advantage of that, but also make sure that it's not too sort of generous. Otherwise, you're not really getting much out of that, value capture, as they would say. So it's a tricky line to draw, and that's why we have experts to draw it. So,
what is the current value capture for the county?
Well, I don't know that there's any explicit value capture that we're doing that would go sort of towards affordable housing in that regard. No, I don't think we've got anything that's really designed along those terms specifically. I mean, obviously, to the extent zoning changes and that provides value to folks to, build or do something new with land, the county obviously gets some tax money out of that. But I don't think that in general we've got anything like that, at least through our zoning codes right now, that I'm specifically aware of, at least.
And I know earlier you talked about scale of need. What exactly is that need in your district?
Well, in my district, I think it's quite high. Certainly Park Circle is, that's the place I live, and I'm happy to live there, but the price pressures that have been sort of generated by, be it just the demand for Park Circle, be it issues perhaps beyond the scope of Charleston County, dealing with access to credit and financing, value of homes, that sort of thing. I think that growing neighborhood is putting pressure in some of the surrounding areas. I think certainly the Rivers Avenue corridor is an area where we're really going to need some affordable housing, especially, as I said, sort of to interact with that low country rapid transit. To really make the most out of that, you're going to need to make sure that the value created by that doesn't start displacing people, and that folks who currently live there and have lived there for some time have the opportunity to really take advantage of the benefits that we're certainly hoping that transit will bring. So I think certainly the need in my district is quite significant.
What is the value of your homes in your district, I should say?
Well, again, it varies greatly. I mean, I don't know what the average value in Park Circle would be, but I would guess it's safely, well, I don't know. There are a number of different sort of homes and stuff in the circle, but I would be surprised if there's much below sort of the 250 mark available, and certainly there's plenty that is well above that. Beyond that, there's certainly areas where I think you can get maybe townhomes or condos in sort of the 100s. So it varies wildly, and I think there's sometimes a misconception that the value of a home is somehow reflective of the quality of life that people can have. But at the same time, there certainly are areas where the value of a home is a real detriment to folks, and they maybe don't have the ability to sort of perhaps finance repairs or whatever the case may be. So I don't want to say that I don't want to say that there's anything particularly bad about housing that is affordable to working people, but I do want to say that it does present some problems when you have that level of disparity, and so I think again there's a lot we can do in that regard.
Let me turn to the Jamal Supplement settlement. Let me ask you this, Rob. You are a former public defender. Why couldn't this have been a private settlement?
Well, in what sense do you mean a private settlement? I mean, it was a private settlement. I mean,
it was announced publicly to the,
Sure. It was announced publicly. Well, I think, frankly, I don't know that we even legally could, keep that sort of private in that sense, as far as not publicly knowledgeable. I mean, you're talking about $8 million in county funds.
Right.
So just from a pure sort of public access to information accountability standard, I think that has got to be something that people are aware of. Again, I think. So, I mean, I think that would be the main reason why it couldn't be something that was done in some sort of confidential fashion. I think another reason that you've seen, certainly some coverage of it is that, look, I mean, it strikes at issues that are, go to the core of our criminal justice system, and it strikes at some issues that clearly require a great deal of reform. So it's certainly an important issue, and even if we could not accomplish those reforms through the settlement itself, I think that the sort of attention that this tragedy has brought to the issue of criminal justice reform, the issue of mental health, and specifically treatment of mental health in the criminal justice system, is something that is ultimately, hopefully, going to be productive, and I think is certainly well worth a great deal of attention. So,
out of this particular case with the Jamal Supplement death, what are those other reforms that were brought to your attention obviously as county council members?
Well, I will say that I think we've got more work to do as far as those reforms. I mean, there have been some reforms proposed from sort of community organizations. it is a bit tricky where, in some sense you might be talking about the court system, in some sense you might be talking about sort of in the jail, in some sense you might be talking about law enforcement sort of out, in the street, on patrol, as it were. And the county can touch all three of those. The county can certainly touch the jail somewhat more, since we have sort of a close, at least financial relationship with the sheriff's office. Same with as far as, officers, sort of on patrol, out encountering folks sort of out in public. But of course there are municipal police departments too. And, so the county could have certainly a more direct effect, funding sort of just a completely non-law enforcement related mental health sort of program. As far as law enforcement policy, look, there are some constitutional limitations to what we can tell a sheriff to do. However, I think that everyone, the sheriff, the council, everyone recognizes the need for some real changes to be made. And so I'm what I would hope, and this has not happened yet, but I would hope is that we would sort of envision sort of a unified sort of approach to reform, where we've got the sheriff's office, we've got municipal police departments, even municipal governments, who are not, necessarily bound to anything we say as county council, but folks sort of putting their heads together, as it were, but also committing to some changes in policy. I mean, there are certainly some things the county council could go it alone on, but I think that for significant changes to happen, we're going to need to be coordinating with some of those other elected officials. I think I've talked a lot about process here. I mean, I think to speak to, particular solutions, and again, I don't think everyone has necessarily come together to that brainstorming session or whatever it would be. I think one thing that we should, and I've been talking with some council members about this, be taking up soon, is trying to formalize something to sort of create whatever we want to call it, a commission or a task force or whatever it may be. But as far as the substantive changes, I think certainly the idea has been put out there of diverting, certain police encounters to instead being sort of crisis response teams. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in that. In the jail side, I think bail reform or sort of reform of our bond system is something that the CJCC has worked on for some time. So I think we have some folks who are well positioned to kind of say, well, how can we, certainly we need better treatment in the jail, but I do think we need to find ways of just keeping people out of the jail more often, who really don't need to be there and need to be in either receiving treatment at home or a facility or wherever it may be, need to be in an area that's more focused on that sort of treatment than in a jail. So, I think those are sort of the general areas, but I have to say that process has not necessarily taken off in sort of a unified way, but I do think a lot of folks are working and thinking about it, and I think maybe the next step is to kind of bring everybody together and see what can we do sort of together. And again, folks are elected officials, so they can take whatever positions they want to, and if folks have differing opinions on what needs to be done, that may be the case. But again, I think there's some chance for sort of a unified reform process that if the sheriff needs our help being put in a reform that we really think is going to be significant, I think folks would be happy to do that, and vice versa. So.
And what is the financial relationship with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office?
No, I mean, we finance the sheriff's office. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. The sheriff's office does not necessarily have its own sort of taxing authority, and they can certainly get grants or money's transferred from the state or something like that. I mean, they have other ways of gathering funding for sure. But the primary source of funding for the sheriff's office, be it the law enforcement side or the running the detention center side, is going to be the county. And so, it's a situation where we don't have the authority to direct someone who is an elected official as to how to run their office, and that's why I do think this should be more of a collaborative effort. Also, I'm not in law enforcement. I'm not in mental health.
Right.
We certainly have some folks in our public safety department in the county who can are very well positioned to advise us on those issues. But that's the relationship effectively that we finance the sheriff's department.
And now, obviously, you are a former public defender, as I mentioned.
Sure.
Could this settlement potentially taint the jury pool?
Well, I mean, I guess potentially yes, but the way that would work is there are processes in place to ensure that doesn't happen.
Okay.
So, I can't speak too much. We don't know what criminal charges, if any, would be brought. But assuming there were criminal charges brought, whether it was the prosecutor's side or the defense side who were concerned about jury pool tainting, I mean, there is, voir dire where you can ask jurors, about connections to the case, what they've seen. I think if things get extreme enough, you can ask for sort of a change of venue. So, I guess the potential for a jury pool to be tainted, I guess, is there in frankly any case. Is it perhaps greater in a public case? I suppose so, but there's also, those tools exist, and I don't think that any lawyer who would be involved would be unable to use those tools to make sure that whatever comes from the criminal side of the investigation, I think there's every opportunity to get a jury that would be fair and impartial. So.
And when it comes back to that settlement, did it get so political that it actually got away from legal facts?
No, I don't think it got so political. I think that, no, I don't think it got so political that it got away from legal facts. I think that there were certainly, we like any organization, if you sued McDonald's or if you sued, a local business or something, I mean, I certainly do think that any organization, and I'm, in civil litigation now, or individual who's being, involved in a civil litigation has to consider not just one aspect of the legal process, but the legal process in totality. And I think you have to think, what does this mean for us as an organization to continue with this? And so that I think was a legitimate consideration. I mean, I think that people would have perhaps been hamstrung in our ability to tackle these policy issues that are frankly, the most important thing that can hopefully come out of this terrible situation. I'm not sure that we would be able to start tackling policy issues if we were still, embroiled in that litigation. And frankly, I think on the merits of the facts of the case, we'll of course never know how that litigation would play out, but that was not something that was thrown to the wayside and not considered. I mean, I think, certainly, our legal department was there every step of the way, and I don't think this was a decision that was made, at least from my end, at least, not without taking their advice very squarely and seriously.
And I know some years ago we were told that the county would go into bankruptcy if it had to pay the SCDOT back for the 526 extension right of way and studies. Now the county has paid $33 million for the hospital, $10 million obviously for the Jamal Sullivan settlement. How is the county not bankrupt right now?
Well, I mean, look, I think you're touching on something that I do take the position that I think we have more sort of, I guess I'd say, fiscal flexibility and authority than maybe other folks on council would agree with me on. So the county's not bankrupt right now because, I mean, we have the revenues and we have been able to, match these expenses with revenues. I hate to bring it all back to affordable housing every time, but of quite frankly, like one of the reasons our revenues are continuing to keep up with whatever expenses we have is that when housing prices shoot up, this was just in Post and Courier recently. When housing prices shoot up, that is a boon to the county budget. And so, I think that frankly, we're not bankrupt just because we're not bankrupt. We have the revenues to kind of keep it going. Now, I think the broader question is, these are not uses of funds that you've identified that are obviously moving policy forward. I mean, again, I'm not to go back into any particular one,
Right.
but I think certainly anyone on county council would have preferred for whatever funds were lost in any sort of prior situation or settlement or whatever it may be. Anyone would have preferred for that. I mean, no one would have preferred for that to have happened. And so, the question is more, how do we prevent those types of things from moving forward? Certainly, I guess if you continue to lose, if negative impacts continue to happen on the county budget, then yeah, the county could go bankrupt, but we're not really particularly close to that happening now, because we do have some flexibility, and I do think there are things that, I just think that a lot of what we have built into our budget is some things can be changed. And so, I think we saw that a little bit. The county was able to reallocate from certain projects to pay for this settlement. As far as the, $33 million for the Naval Hospital, I don't particularly remember where all that went from, although I do know that the money was lost due to, two separate transactions that took, some years in between. So, but of course, no, you don't want to be absorbing hits to the county budget on a consistent basis. And so, have we been able to absorb those without going into great financial distress and bankruptcy? Yes, obviously we have. But it's not some. It's certainly concerning, because I think perhaps the bigger question is not immediate financial distress, but what good could we have done with that money otherwise?
Obviously, when you talk about the settlement, you talked about you had to divert money from other projects to this settlement. What exactly were those projects that needed those particular monies?
Well, so there were a number of projects. I think some fleet replacements, maybe some repairs, I believe, to various sort of public facilities that were going to be paid out of the general fund sort of surplus this year.
Right.
I think that a lot of those are the monies that sort of wound up being diverted. So I think there's some projects that have been put on hold. I think some of those projects I have maybe been willing to put on hold for other issues anyways. So, I think that again, I don't think that the issue is so much that the county cannot take this financial hit right now. Now, I don't want to dismiss that again. You cannot continue to take financial hits in the order of millions of dollars. But I think the real concern is when you have something like that happen, these are public funds, taxpayer funds, and so, you really want the bigger issue for now, at least, and hopefully it doesn't become great financial distress for the county, but I don't think we're there. The bigger issue is that, this could have been used for something else. So, what those particular funds for the settlement would have been used for, folks can debate whether those would have been the best use of funds either, but I will say that would have been a democratically chosen choice to use those funds to, invest in sort of the long-term, assets of the county, which is, a perfectly reasonable use of public funds to preserve our assets. And so, yeah, I mean, perhaps that manifests itself down the road someday if we have to make hard choices between something in the future. But for now, again, I don't think we're facing great financial distress. I do think we are facing some lost opportunities, though.
And I got 3 more questions for you because I know you have to run. But let me ask you this. What were those flexibilities that is in the current budget?
Sorry?
What were those flexibilities in the recent budget?
What were the I mean, again, I think that some of the flexibility came from, we had, again, I believe about a $20 million, perhaps a little bit more than that, surplus in the general fund. So that's a sort of unrestricted funds that the county can use for various projects. I think a lot of it was scheduled for more or less, again, sort of reinvesting and preserving some county assets, again, repairs to some county facilities, replacing some fleet replacements. Again, I think you can debate whether that was the top priority or not. I think it ultimately was the top priority of council until the settlement came along and became again a higher priority. So I think that's where the money was mainly taken from. I couldn't speak to every particular item that it was taken from. I could get you that information fairly shortly, but that was again sort of the general. Basically, deferred maintenance is effectively how I would characterize it.
Sure. And can you share with the citizens of Charleston County what those tax revenues have looked like over the past year?
Well, so tax revenues have been, perhaps surprisingly pretty strong over the past year. Again, you look at the fact that housing prices have gotten kind of insane. I think overall that's a bad thing, frankly. But I think that there are good and bad sides of everything, and while the bad side may outweigh the good side of rising housing prices from a county finance perspective is that, frankly, it means more property tax revenue. 5% of 200 is not the same as 5% of 300. So, those revenues grew. I believe sales tax revenue also grew. I think, I don't know that we would have expected that going into the year we had with the pandemic, but it turns out a lot of people, ordered stuff off of Amazon. So, I think the county has seen some pretty strong revenues. That's not to say that we don't have some challenges in prioritizing how we use those revenues, because I do think, again, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about housing, we've got some pretty serious, and again, preserving our own assets that we do have in our own operations. The expenses are also going to be very significant. So I guess what I would say is, luckily, county revenues have not, just stagnated while expenses rise, but the rise in revenues has certainly, been matched by rising expenses, and so it's not as if we're just flush with funds. But I would say, there is the benefit that, again, county revenues did not dry up necessarily, but yeah, we've got some pretty serious expenses as well.
You talk about infrastructure. Let me talk to you about 526.
Sure.
The 526 extension analysis is moving along to more details coming out later this summer. Update to the environmental impact statement, more details on the alternative routes, that is, and design options and cost estimates. What is the statement on environmental impacts right now?
Well, I guess the latest statement on environmental impacts would go back to the 2016 study. I believe it was 2016. I could be wrong on the year, but there's obviously the neat process. They got to that particular stage where alternatives were compared, and there were environmental analyses done of the various alternatives. I think that would be where it currently stands, sort of, formal level, as far as what folks have been working on behind the scenes. I think all of that kind of needs to be updated. I mean, I think you need to kind of look at, and when you talk about that process, it's not just the environment. as one would sort of consider the natural environment, although that's obviously a big part of it. But it's also, impacts on communities, and that sort of thing. So it's a much broader look. And I think, I couldn't tell you what those numbers are going to be as far as those impacts, but they're certainly something I'm eager to see, and they're very concerning. If they're wildly disproportionate to what we thought, I guess 6-7 years ago.
Right.
So.
And I know the last cost estimate was done 7 or 8 years ago, 725 to 775 million. Given the time that it has gone by and significant cost increases these days with materials such as steel and concrete, at what point does this cost just becomes too high for the average county taxpayer?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we could very well be reaching that point, for me at least. I mean, I think I've told everyone who I've talked to about, I'm not, opposed to 526 in any way, shape, or form. But, certainly this is a project that I could get priced out of. And, I'm pretty concerned that we might be talking about disproportionately beyond what we expected. I mean, I think that could very well be what happens. Again, though, I'm not, set on opposing it no matter what. But yeah, I'm concerned about that cost. And so what would be too much for a county taxpayer? Well, I think you look at how that's funded. I mean, currently, or at least in its last iteration, the plan was to fund it through the transportation sales tax. So that transportation sales tax money, there's a number of projects we want to do with that. And so, one thing that I would certainly look at is when we get numbers back on that, is it going to cost out basically everything else, and the transportation sales tax is just going to become effectively the 526 tax? That would be a big problem for me. Of course, to add another layer of complication on the other side, we've got a president who's trying to pass an infrastructure bill. I'm frankly curious whether some of that would wind up filtering to this project. So, what is going to be the cost to county taxpayers, I think is very difficult to even know right now. I mean, first of all, we don't have the number that they're going to put out. But second of all, I do think it's something of an open question how we get to that number, even though there is currently a framework for that. I mean, the current framework is the state pays for, I want to say, $450 or $420 maybe, that they had sort of committed through the State Infrastructure Bank in prior iterations of the plan, and the county is effectively on the hook for whatever it is over that. I am very skeptical as to whether I could be, swayed to sign on to that. But again, I'm not fully convinced that that's ultimately how we get funded anyways, because I think there's a lot of moving parts going on. So, to your question is what's too much for the county taxpayer? I guess the simplest way to answer that is in its current framework, and if it starts pushing out every other transportation sales tax project, then that would be too much for me. I can't speak for other council members.
What are those transportation projects that you need for your district?
Well, I mean, certainly 41 is sort of at the edge of my district, but it does touch my district, and it's an important one. I think that that's a significant issue, and there's significant differences of opinion as to how to approach it. So that's one that we'll need. I think there's a lot of local issues as well. There's funding that goes to sort of local road improvements that would be sort of more distributed maybe by the City of North Charleston, but I certainly want to make sure that is something that can happen. So there's a number of projects that would be funded by that particular sales tax.
And unfortunately, the battery's running a little low, but
it's fine. I'm sorry. I'll let you go.
Oh no, you good. But the moving parts. What are those moving parts right now when it comes to I-26 East?
Well, so I couldn't speak to that one as much. I mean, the East project, you mean sort of the the widening, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's I should say that. I'm sorry.
So of course that's more of an SCDOT project. I think from a county perspective, what we would want to see is just making sure that we can advocate to the state, the folks who are going through that project, that you know, it not be destructive to the communities that it's going to affect, and you know, certainly to the extent that mitigation funds might be available. We've certainly seen that with sort of larger infrastructure projects that aren't conducted at the county level. You know, we would want to be getting as much as we can out of those for the communities that are affected, if that is what ultimately happens.
And how much would the mitigated funds be for this county?
I mean, probably none directly to the county. I don't think that would be how it would work. But you know, I think certainly, again, community groups and that sort of thing who would hopefully be beneficiaries of that. I don't think that leaving them to do their advocacy alone is necessarily what, you know, if they need us, then I'm happy to help them out with that. But, you know, again, I'm not as familiar with the widening as far as, you know, the moving parts that would go into it, because again, we're not, you know, really conducting that project. But again, my main concern would be, you know, if it is something that's going to happen, we would want to make sure that we can take care of the folks who those impacts are going to be borne by.
Rob Wehrman, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, again, thanks for having me, Quintin.
Thank you. And likewise.